Hi friends, I'm Umashankar Pandey and this is the Dr. USP channel. Often when we have a conversation or when we are reading a text, certain words, phrases or sentences appear much more profound. They appear much more intense or bring in a flood of emotions which is much beyond the literal meaning of those words, phrases or sentences. The Dhvani theory in Indian aesthetics looks into these meanings which appear beyond the obvious. The Dhvani theory in Indian aesthetics looks into meanings beyond the obvious. Let us see beyond words, Dhvani theory, the power of suggestion in this video. The term Dhvani is applied to suggestive poetry when the suggested sense predominates over the literal sense. Suggestion by itself is not enough in drama or poetry. Anandvardhan, the well-known Kashmiri poet and philosopher in the 9th century AD, believes what is suggested must be charming, and this charm can come only through rasa or emotion, which we discussed in the last video. Dhvanyalok by Anandvardhan is structured into 4 chapters known as Udyotas. The first Udyot specifically lays the foundation of his theory, which is then expanded upon in future chapters. The essence of poetry can be understood in 2 ways. The expressed, which is the vachya, and the meaning is straightforward and recognizable, often manifesting in the form of alankaras, which are the figures of speech. On the other hand, the implied meaning is the pratiyamana. Pratiyamana is where the implied sense is something more than the literal meaning and depends on the whole poem and not merely on its parts. The implicit meaning or pratiyamanartha cannot be grasped by those who rely on grammar and vocabulary. Instead, it is understood by true admirers of poetry. This suggested meaning is the key element in poetry. When this suggested sense takes center stage, the poem is known as Dhvani Kavya. Poetic expression is understood through 3 primary levels of meaning. The abhidha, which is the denotation, which is the primary literal meaning of a word or a phrase. It is a straightforward dictionary meaning that a word conveys. That is the most basic level of meaning that a word carries without any additional connotations, implications, or symbolic interpretations. Lakshana or indication, when the primary meaning is either impossible or inappropriate in a given context, lakshana comes into play. It allows words to convey a secondary figurative meaning, often seen in metaphors or idiomatic expressions. Lakshana allows language to convey a meaning that goes beyond the literal, often through metaphor, symbolism, or idiomatic expression. The village is on the Ganges. Here, Lakshana comes into the play because, of course, the village is located on the bank, not on the river itself. Lakshana is of 2 types. The Goni Lakshana occurs when the primary meaning is retained in a metaphorical sense. For example, the phrase, "he is a lion on the battlefield," which indicates bravery and strength, does not mean literal attributes associated with a lion. The Shuddha Lakshana occurs when the primary meaning is completely abandoned in favor of a more appropriate secondary meaning. In the village is on the river Ganges example above, the Shuddha Lakshana is at play. The Lakshana is when a secondary meaning itself generates another layer of meaning, often used in more complex poetic or philosophical texts. Vyanjana or suggestion is the crux of Dhvani theory. In Vyanjana, the words and their direct meanings serve as a vehicle to suggest something more profound. This suggestive meaning engages the reader's or listener's imagination, allowing them to perceive and experience the underlying emotions. Vyanjana is the capacity of language to suggest meanings that are neither directly stated nor merely figurative. These suggested meanings evoke emotions, ideas, and experiences that resonate beyond the explicit content of the text. See, for example, a bee is hovering near her, drawn by the fragrance of her lotus-like face. She is fanning it away gently with her hand, but her eyes, casting sidelong glances, reveal her pleasure. On the surface, this verse describes a simple scene of a woman gently fanning away a bee. However, through Dhvani, it suggests much more. The bee drawn to the woman's face can be seen as symbolizing a person attracted to her beauty. Arthanvaya Vyanjana is the ideational suggestion. This occurs when the suggestion leads to a specific idea or concept that is not directly stated. For example, in the metaphor, the moon smiled. The moon's smile suggests the idea of a gentle, pleasing light, creating an atmosphere of calm and tranquility. In the Rasa Vyanjana, which is an emotional suggestion, this is considered the highest form of Vyanjana, where the suggestion evokes a particular emotion or ras. For instance, a description of a desolate landscape might evoke the feeling of sorrow or despondency. Vastu Dhvani refers to the suggestion of ideas or content that the text indirectly conveys. In a poem describing a desolate battlefield, the poet might mention silent swords lying in the dust. While the literal meaning talks about swords, the suggested idea, the Vastu Dhvani, might be the futility of war or the end of conflict. The Alankar Dhvani, which is suggestion through figures of speech, involves a suggestion of meaning through rhetorical devices or figures of speech like metaphors, similes, and personifications. In this type, the beauty of the poetry lies in the artistic use of language. For example, the smile is the first ray of the dawn, meaning warmth and new beginnings. The Rasa Dhvani goes beyond ideas or rhetorical devices to engage the reader's or listener's emotions directly, making them feel the intended mood or sentiment. Example, in a verse describing the sight of a withered flower, the poet might evoke Rasa Dhvani by suggesting feelings of sorrow and transience. Dhvani is of two types, avivakshita vachya and vivakshita anyapar vachya. Avivakshita vachya, when the literal meaning of the word is not intended to be the primary focus. Vivakshita anyapar, when the literal meaning supports a deeper implied meaning. Literal meaning is indeed intended to be understood, but its primary role is to support or lead to a deeper implied meaning. Avivakshita vachya, when the literal meaning is not intended, the literal meaning to a more extended meaning. The literal meaning may either be irrelevant or inadequate in the context, and so the true significance comes from what is suggested. For example, he is a lion, referring to bravery and strength. Atyanta tiraskrita vachya, the literal meaning is completely disregarded. The village is on the Ganges. Here the literal meaning is completely disregarded, and the intended meaning is that the village is on the bank of the Ganges. Vivakshita anyapar vachya. Here the literal meaning is important, but it is not the final destination. It serves to convey a more profound idea or emotion that the poet wants to communicate. For example, the sun set, the darkness filled the valley. The literal meaning might describe a natural event, but it suggests end of hope or onset of despair. Asam Lakshya Krama Vyangya, where the stages of understanding the suggested sense are imperceptible. For example, the moonlight spread across the night sky. The emotions and aesthetic flavor suggested by the image of moonlight are not immediately obvious, but emerge gradually as the reader reflects on the scene. Anandavardhan argues that the power of Dhvani, the suggestive meaning, relies heavily on the reader's ability to perceive it. The Sahyrdaya is not just a passive recipient of the poet's message. The Sahyrdaya plays a crucial role in this process. The poet encodes the deeper meaning, emotions and suggestions within the text, but it is the Sahyrdaya who decodes them, bringing them to full realization. Without a Sahyrdaya, these subtleties of the poetry might go unnoticed. and the text would fail to deliver its full aesthetic impact. Bhattanayaka, the 11th century scholar, challenged the Dhvani theory. He argued that the emotional experience evoked by a poem does not necessarily depend on Dhvani, but on the process of universalization or sadharikaran that enables the reader to experience the emotion as if it were their own. Nyayikas were concerned that the theory of Dhvani introduced ambiguity into the interpretation of texts by allowing for multiple layers of suggestive meanings, which could lead to subjective interpretations. Abhinav Gupta's critique was more of a refinement than a rejection to incorporate how ras is experienced, suggesting that Dhvani should be understood in conjunction with the emotional and aesthetic impact it produces.
Thanks for staying along, friends. As always, it was a delight having you here. I'll be back with another video very soon. Till then, have a great time.